Hi, class. All right, now we're looking at Chapter 19, Socio-Emotional Development of Late Adulthood. It's an interesting chapter because it kind of starts to tie everything together as we look at this progression, specifically with Erikson's theory. We're going to talk about 4 different theories of socio-emotional development. First is Erikson's theory. This last stage is integrity versus despair. And so it's when we see a positive resolution for all the 7 stages before this, then it comes to a place where there is a culmination of wisdom and integrity. So they're able to look back at life and say, yep, there are some ups and some downs, but overall, things were put together the way they expected them to be put together. And so they have a sense of accomplishment. So going through each of those stages, they eventually evolve to this, or culminate in this stage. Now, one thing I want to mention with Erikson's theory, because I'll have people that would say, well, I didn't choose the parents that I got, and so maybe things didn't go well there, or maybe there was some disruption in my adolescence or early adulthood. And just because you had difficulty in one of those areas doesn't mean that the rest of theirs are going to be bad. They can be resolved. Those conflicts can be resolved in the next stages. One thing when we look at Erikson's theory too is there's a thing called reminiscence therapy. And essentially, it's where the elderly look back at life, and then as they're reminiscing, they're going to resolve some of the conflicts, according to Erikson, to resolve some of the conflicts that they had that they didn't do well. I don't know of many people whose lives were just picture perfect and things went well. And so that's this component of this theory. The next theory is the activity theory. And the activity theory is, it says, and I'm just glancing at my notes, the more active and involved older adults are, the more likely they are to be satisfied with their life. And so what they'll say in this particular theory, and there's pros and cons to each of these theories, but in this particular theory, they would say because of retirement, now they have, they're kind of stripped of their identity. This is a time for them to find substitute roles. And I do have to say anecdotally that I've seen my clients that have come in and said, especially I've seen it with women, said, as career women who've had families, and then they're widowed. And so they'll often tell me, well, I was a teacher, I raised my children, I was a wife for 30 or 40 years, and now my husband has died, and so I don't really know who I am. And so this activity theory kind of comes into play there. The next theory that we want to talk about is socio-emotional selectivity theory. And this theory says that there's a narrowing of social interaction. And they would say that the reason why so essentially they're narrowing their friendships down. And this theory says that they do that because they're looking for positive emotional experiences and minimizing emotional risks. It challenges a stereotype that older adults are in emotional despair because of social isolation. When in fact what they're doing is they're not in despair, according to this theory. They're narrowing things down to prevent emotional risk. Then we have selective optimization with compensation. I think that probably the best way to describe it is an anecdotal experience that I had. And so I grew up in Miami, Florida, and after school ended, everybody just went to the beach. The beach was right there, so we just went there. And what we used to do is we would play racquetball, and there we had racquetball. There was 3 walls, and then there was sand. And so these older elderly gentlemen that were playing racquetball with us were taking us for everything we had. And the reason why is that first they spent all day long playing racquetball, But secondly, what they would do is they wouldn't go for a ball that was difficult to get to. They compensated. And when a ball went out into the sand, well, I'm not gonna make an 80-year-old go out and get the ball. They're gonna wear out the teenager to go out and get the ball. And so that's an example of this. Arthur Rubinstein, a great pianist, they would say, wow, it doesn't look like he slowed down. He was playing concerts at age 80. And what he did is he slowed everything down. So he compensated. And then when he went to the pieces that were fast, he sped up. And it gave the impression that he was just, playing at the same rate as he had done in his youth. All right, let's see what else we got. Personality, again, looking at McRae and Costa's 5-factor model, one thing that they say that is continuing to develop is conscientiousness. That means, they're saying sorry if I'm late or those type things. And so we see this particular trait continuing to develop in adulthood and the elderly. And it kind of makes sense because you're a little bit more frailer, so, you want to be polite to people. But you need their help with things. Self-esteem. This is kind of an interesting time. Across the board, we, even in middle school, if you remember back when we looked at that chapter, there was some debate about whether or not male self-esteem dipped. In this stage, 70s and 80s, what we find is that for the first time, males and females' self-esteem converge together. So males usually always had higher self-esteems and they converge. And one of the reasons why they say this convergence occurs is just deteriorating physical health, negative societal attitudes towards the elderly, widowhood, having a low religious commitment are also factors associated with it. Let's look at my notes, seeing what are some important components here. Older adults in society, one concern is stereotyping, ageism. Ageism, the text talks about it being widespread. However, increased number of adults living to an older age has led to active efforts to improve society's image of ageism. I know my mother, she just stopped working. She's 84 years old, stopped working last year, 83. She was helping the elderly in a nursing home to maintain their cognitive abilities, and she would occasionally talk to me about ageism, and I'm not so sure, to be honest with you, that ageism was a factor, but that is a concern for her. Policy issues is a real concern, especially when we look at the status of the economy. When the economy is doing well, that's okay. When things decline, it's going to be interesting to see how people will feel. Are they going to feel and believe that the elderly are just consumers of society, or do they still have something to give? And that may contribute to some of that ageism or policy factors. Is it okay to take money away from children to support the elderly? Children's school programs, for example. And that lends itself to what they call generational inequity. And that is the perception that the elderly are receiving entitlements that others may not be able to receive. And certainly when we think about Social Security and the solvency there, might come to that. Poverty in old age is a double jeopardy of ageism and poverty. Lifestyle, what we're finding actually, which is kind of interesting, is that there's an increase of cohabitating amongst the elderly, kind of following that trends of the early adulthood. Some of that is due to loss of finances if they're married, as far as Social Security benefits is concerned. Others is due to concern of loss of wealth that's been accumulated over the years. Say a widow and a widower marrying, well, now the wealth they bring into that marriage is now combined property, and so as a result of that, we're seeing increases in cohabitation. Great grandparenting, again, common to see fourth generation families, older adults are embedded in family relationships, have much less distress. We see that. Friendships, new friendships are less likely to be forged, though some seek out new friendships, especially following the death of a spouse. Social support, very important. We call it the convoy model of social relations. Social support helps individuals of all ages cope more effectively. Altruism, volunteerism, we see the elderly more likely to engage in volunteerism. Again, it's kind of a sense of purpose in their life. Ethnicity and aging can also result in another type of double jeopardy, where it can also be a triple jeopardy, where you've got an ethnic minority, maybe a female, and also in poverty. So you've got this three-pronged factors that may be affecting their development. Let's see what else we've got. How to age successfully. Don't overlook the positive dimensions of late adulthood. There's some real advantages there. Proper diet, active lifestyle, mental stimulation, being active, and perceived control of the environment is so important. In fact, I have a friend of mine who is 89. She'll be 90 this year, and she lives independently. She's living on her own, but at the same time, she's also mapped out a nursing home that she would go to if things began to decline for her. And so with that said, guys, that finishes up chapter 19. Very interesting chapter. I don't know if I mentioned that my wife's a gerontologist, and so those are people that study. She did her PhD at USC, so she's contributing to my lectures from her own insight and her research that she did during her doctoral studies. All right, hopefully you enjoyed this introduction to the chapter, guys. Thank you so much.